Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of Teaching for Sustainability. And today we're joined by Jonathan Cooper.
Hi,
Hey, Jonathan.
everybody.
Jonathan is an ex-primary head teacher from the Brighton and Hove area. And Jonathan, you've been involved or instrumental in leading the Our City, Our World initiative, which is sort of started in Brighton and is now kind of gone national.
So we started about 2.5 years ago. I sort of semi-retired as a head teacher, and I was approached by Brighton and Hove because they were very interested in developing a curriculum. They'd obviously declared the climate emergency and they'd put their plan together, but really quite radically, because not many authorities have done that. They really focused in on education and said it's really important that we look at our schools. Yeah, look at our young people. They're going to be the people going out into society. How can we develop the culture, the curriculum of schools in order to make sure that when these young people become active citizens, their actions, their beliefs, their values will support the world that we want to see.
What,
So, sorry,
Jonathan,
Paul.
just in terms of take a step
Yeah.
back to you as a head teacher,
Yeah.
how much of this was in your practice and the school that you were working in? Kind of, what did that look like when you were a head teacher?
It started only in the final few years of my time as a head teacher. And I look back with somewhat embarrassed, actually, that I didn't see it. I always felt that I was somebody as a head that was driven by, moral purpose, values, principles, doing the right thing. And it gradually became clear to me, as I say, 2 or 3 years towards the end of my headship, that really we should be doing a lot more in school around sustainability. And that we'd taken for granted that, having your eco committee and doing regular bits and pieces of that was going to make a difference. But actually, to be honest, hand on heart, we could see you were affecting the lives of about 12 children who worked in the eco committee. You had one very tired teacher kind of trying to lead it at lunch times and so on. And that actually, if we felt that as a school we were effectively working with young people to give them the skills and knowledge for the future that they really needed and then to help them feel care and compassion for the world around them, we weren't doing enough. And that, and so it was a kind of revisiting what our vision was for the school, what our values were, and so on. And we did it all together, and it came out very, very clearly that this is something that you can't do piecemeal, a bit here, a bit there. It had to be something that you lived through every part of your school. And when we talk about, and we'll talk more about this perhaps with Our City, Our World, but when you talk about the curriculum, for me as a head teacher, the curriculum is about basically everything that children learn. Yeah, what you want the children to learn. That's in the relationships in the school. That's in the environment in the school. That's in the events. That's in your assemblies. That's in lessons and things like that. But it's everything the children experience. And we wanted that experience to reflect our values around how to live in a caring, as I say, sustainable way with the planet and with others around them. So I began to work intensively around that with my school.
Mhm.
That's why I think in some respects we were approached by Brighton and Hove when I took semi-retirement to sort of say, well, actually, we've been working a lot in this field and been trying to promote it more broadly and so on. So
Yeah.
that's where I was coming from.
It's really interesting you talk about the curriculum in that way because I think there are a lot of people in education and maybe people who are newer to teaching who think about the curriculum as this really contained, narrow, could be
Mm.
even something that's bought in from some sort of private provider, and they don't think of it in that full spectrum. I think that the way that you've talked about, the relationships and every single aspect of what a school is doing is that's what makes up the curriculum.
Yeah, and actually, yeah. I mean, for me, fundamentally, it's about relationships in school. It's about connections. And if you've got that right, everything else comes from it because you can see what has value really from that. So, yes, that's why I'm so passionate about this work, is because I think it's fundamentally what we go into teaching for.
Mm.
Yeah, and we're not just kind of delivering;
Yeah.
we're actually working with hearts and minds, and that's what I love about it. So.
The other thing that you said there as well about this idea that which is actually still too common in schools. This idea of a small eco group where there's one single
Mm.
teacher leading it, and like you say, they are maybe the most passionate, enthusiastic person, but they might often burn out. And it's also something that then, if they leave or if something happens to them in their life, it might then drop off the radar. But the
Mm.
idea that we need to acknowledge that and say, look, we're past this now. It needs to be something which is every single pupil, every single subject, every lesson.
Yeah, and every other member of staff and your families and the community. Well, we again part of the RCD work is this great belief that the school sits as a sort of hub of the community and has great influence within that community. Where if you and you can use that influence to actually work and develop beyond your school walls and it's most important that you do, into the local area, working with other organizations, working with families and so on, enriching the experience of not just the pupils in your school, but the staff as well, every member of staff. And your families, as I say, in the community as well, and making everybody recognize that it's, like I say, their responsibility as well. It was,
Mm.
in some respects, the Eco Committee is actually undermines that by saying everybody says, oh, well, they're doing it.
Yeah.
Don't need to worry about that. I can
Mm.
tick that box. And so, but actually, no, everybody should be able to, in a school, should be able to turn around to you and say, listen, as part of my role and responsibility in this school, this is how my behavior, how my action is developing in relation to my knowledge of climate change and sustainability.
Mm.
Yeah.
That sense as well of the school as the heart of the community, it sort of maybe harks back. I don't, it might be nostalgic in the sense that it never existed, but I think it does return to a previous idea of schools. But it's shifted, and physically it's shifted, where schools now have these sort of 6 foot metal fences around them, and they're like impregnable. I know I've experienced this often going to schools, and you have to press so many buzzers and speak to so many people just even to access the reception.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think we'll ever get beyond that now. We've gone that way. I mean, that will be the case. But those are, yes, physical, but actually sort of spiritual, emotional connections. Going out into that, that's still possible. You can still do it. It depends how inviting you make your school and how much you say, actually, we want to reach out and work with you and communicate with you and live with you. So it's that openness from the school, even though it does physically have to have barriers around it most of the time now, sadly.
But what about then the Our City, Our World story? Do you want to sort
Yeah.
of explain a bit more about how that has developed and come about? And then also
Hmm.
maybe to talk a bit more about the structure of kind of, I don't know, the different aspects of the program and how it all works.
Yeah, okay. So it's as I say, we approached. So the first most important thing for me was that actually whatever we devised was something that practically would work in schools, given their present structures. That it wasn't going to be an add-on. This was just going to basically enhance, enrich, make more relevant what the work that they were already doing. So we wanted to work with schools. So we took, obviously, with these sort of things, we took 10 pilot schools, a range of schools, secondary schools, primary schools, special schools, infant schools, and so on, different phases. And we began from scratch to think about what it would look like. We became very quickly aware of this idea of the broader curriculum. So we knew that we'd have to look not just at the curriculum, we'd look at nature connection, outdoor learning, operations, children's change making, and so on. There'd be a whole range of work they would have to do. We worked with them on deciding things like the conceptual development, what we felt young people should know from reception, all the way through up to year 11, the skills, the knowledge, the concepts that we felt they should learn, devise a framework around that together. We began to pilot this in the schools. We began to develop an assembly program together as well, because we wanted it to be regular. And we began to develop what we call a thematic approach as well, which is schools are busy institutions, so they need focus. So we looked at those sort of key 6 areas around environmental, around waste, consumption and waste, around energy, water, biodiversity, etc. The 6 different areas. And we said, well, actually, why don't we just focus on each of those for a term,
Hmm.
yeah, and do it as a rolling program. And we'll do it in assemblies. So everybody will be, say, looking at water for a term. And we'll be doing it in assemblies, and we'll be carrying out class actions and whole school actions, and we'll be learning about it. And then we'll be asking families to make pledges and to change their behaviours. And then we'll be connecting with local organisations at the same time. So we're bringing the local community in and working within our local area and so on. And we'll be focused. Yeah, because at the moment, it's a bit of, are we saving paper this week? Are we switching the lights off? Are we doing? No, we are all going to be working on this and thinking about this. Yeah, the staff are going to be thinking about their behaviors. How are they changing their behaviors? Subject leaders are going to be thinking about how am I changing the way that I work in schools around this area. So we came up with a certain sort of format and structure that we then took and developed a framework, a step-by-step guide as how to kind of implement radical restructuring of your school in a step-by-step way. So you don't have to do it overnight.
Mm.
Most of our schools do it over a period of about 2 years. But by the end of it, you can look at every different area of your school. So we start off with a curriculum. You've integrated lots of the conceptual framework, use the conceptual framework to integrate learning around climate change sustainability into all areas of your curriculum, whether it's art or music or drama and so on. That you've actually looked at your operations, and you developed, now using, and that's nice, the climate action plans have come alongside that as well, but you've developed a very clear step-by-step guide to how operationally you're going to develop your school. You've looked at your outdoor learning and nature connection. And seriously, we talk about this, you're not doing this really in a half-hearted way. We know
Mm,
that we are, as we know, one of the most nature-deprived countries in Europe, Western world, etc. We know that 75% of our children spend more time inside than prisoners do in the UK. And so all those figures are out there. You'd have thought that the government would be kind of saying, schools, what are you doing about this?
mm,
We can see. They're not. So we as schools have to do this. We have to say we cannot sustain this. So, serious development of outdoor learning, serious of looking for opportunities of connection with nature and so on. Then alongside that, we also look at children as change makers and families as change makers, because we know that the learning has to very quickly move into a position of change and hope and empowerment. And so everything around this thematic approach is very much about young people doing things in their classes, in their schools, in their local communities during that term around water, around energy, or something like that. So, it continues. We then look at even the role of the PTA in events and things. So we know full well, because children are very good at this, they can see when you're being hypocritical. They can look around
mm,
and say, well, you said we were going to do this, but I've just seen this over here. So, I mean, they're good at it. You need to make sure that, we are continually challenging the way that we behave in schools. We talk about, is it green? If it is, could it be greener as a sort of constant mantra of anything that you're doing and
mm,
so on. So we worked with those 10 schools. We developed this program. It got enriched every time we took out a new cohort. Eventually, we were working with 94% of the schools in Brighton and Hove, which is a substantial number. And it
mm.
was quite good. Eventually, you get to a point where you get that sort of FOMO,
Yeah.
where head
Well,
teachers are talking and this strange Our City, Our World that was, 1 year ago, where well, I'm not quite sure what that's about. Suddenly, everybody's singing its praise and saying, gosh, look at what we're doing in these
mm.
schools.
I
So,
was going to say, let me jump in, Jonathan.
yeah,
I've been and visited some of the schools, and when you speak to the teachers, they're so committed to it, and there's also that sense of collective action as well.
yeah.
They sort of, and I think it's partly also that idea that you've said, look, we're all focusing on a similar theme, or the same theme, and so
Mm.
they know that in another school down the road, or someone else is doing a similar sort of, and they're sort of sharing and supporting each other, and that kind of collective effort, kind of knowing that other people are involved, I think really is beneficial to that momentum.
Yeah, you are. When you're feeling so overwhelmed, and we know that's a common feeling around the crisis that we're facing. You're absolutely right, Paul. Knowing that you're not alone, and this the very nature of dealing, as I say, with different themes. You know that while you're working on biodiversity, you've got 5 or 6 other schools in the local authority working on, and you can talk to them and share events, share initiatives, share ideas, and so on. Classes can talk to each other, and primarily for the children, but they can see that this is, like you say, the collective effort and it's making a substantial difference. We're not just saving 10 litres of water, we're saving
Mm.
millions and millions of litres of
Yeah.
water if we all make these very small changes. And for children, that is just in terms of motivating them and helping them cope with any kind of anxieties that they might have around the future they're facing, they suddenly feel that they're making a difference. And the fact we're not doing it generally in schools is so wrong. Our
Mm.
education system at the moment is failing these kids. It really is. It is. There are a lot of pressures on schools, but if you lose sight of what's important, what we're in it for, and
Mm.
and it's not right. And I think we
Mm.
have lost sight under the pressures from outside at the moment of we need schools to begin to kind of revision and reimagine what they could be like and what they
Mm.
need to be like in order to actually support our children in the
Yeah.
future.
So, Jonathan, sorry, I did interrupt you there.
Yeah,
You were going to talk a bit more about that idea of then taking it beyond Brighton. So
yeah.
there was that 2 years ago, or was it a year ago that you
Yeah,
then
so
got
about
the
a year and a
fund?
half ago, we were lucky
Mm.
that we now use this framework that we've got already in place in Brighton and Hove, so it looks like it's been successful. And then we were awarded a grant through the decarbonisation grant through the government and managed by Let's Go Zero. So we took it out to 5 other authorities, yeah, to Brent, to Devon, to Leicester, to Suffolk, and to Bedford. We wanted to try and spread it as far and wide as possible to try it in different kind of communities, different contexts to show that it could work wherever. And yeah, now we're moving into those sort of those areas are moving into their sort of second cohorts and are thinking about third cohorts of schools and so on. So it's gradually rolling out. We've reached about, I think at the moment, it's about 170, 180 schools, and that's 50 odd, 60 odd thousand pupils and so many thousand
Mm.
members of staff and so on. But we'd like it just to really gain some real momentum where it spreads sort of organically through the schools.
One of the questions I do have is, so it started with very much Brighton and Hove council support. Um, uh, do you think that local authority support is a really fundamental aspect to this? Have you seen it work elsewhere where that doesn't exist, or how important is that as a sort of part of the jigsaw?
The local authority support is vital in this. It really is. And it's not, if you want to put together a climate emergency plan in your local authority, and if you have not got education as the foundation of that plan, I'd have another look at your plan. And to be honest, have a look at quite a few plans across local authorities. Education gets very little mention. Really doesn't. And I cannot understand it. Sometimes you look at things in the world and you think, are people blind? How can you begin to think that you want to change the way that your community, your society, your authority works without saying, well, actually, education is the key to that. We need to start in schools. And yes, we educate our adults and our community and our businesses and things like that. But schools are fundamental in terms of legacy and sustainability around.
Mm.
Yeah, it's for me, it's always quite a bit of a surprise that it doesn't exist, but it's got to exist, and local authorities have got to support this. And to be honest, it makes sense for local authorities because they're all strapped for cash. But they emissions from school buildings make up about 30% of the
Mm.
emissions from council building itself. There'll be a hell of a lot of savings made if
Mm.
they got schools to a point where they were all acting in a much more sustainable way.
Mm.
Because, we do know schools, oh, God bless them. I mean, I was the same as I had for waste a lot of money, waste a lot of resources.
Mm.
So this is a way of actually,
Yeah.
if you're not sold by the moral, this is a budget saving
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
initiative.
I also just wanted to pick up as well. There's some real, I think of them as standout initiatives that have happened, particularly across Brighton and Hove. But
Mm.
there's the is it a sort of Flower Meadows initiative.
Yeah,
Do you want
yeah.
to talk a little bit more about that one? And I know also that a lot of the schools in Brighton and Hove have been real champions of things like the eco refill shops.
Mm.
Um, uh,
Composting as
yeah.
well. Yeah, they're the key big initiative we've tried to make. Yeah, we've tried to make substantial shifts in certain key areas. Use of plastics is a big one, single-use plastics as well. And that's what you can do once you start up a community of schools and you begin to work together and begin to think about how we can make some radical shifts. Yes, that's been around composting. That's been around single-use plastics. That's been around this the Meadows project, which is a lovely one, which is where we recognise the schools have a lot of grounds, some of them, some don't, but it doesn't matter that we can rewild certain areas of our school playgrounds over to and try and develop meadows. And what we try and do, and we talk about this, is very much about this sort of nature corridor. Yeah, we try and create coming down through Brighton and Hove,
Mm.
from the Sussex Downs down to the sea, through all the school playgrounds and again, it's that collective image, and some schools have taken things like that and worked even more. There was a school up in Hove that when it was doing its biodiversity, it did the No Mow May, but it asked all its parents. It was quite, houses that did have gardens and things like that, not to mow. And then they worked out this massive acreage that had been given over during that month to
Mm.
rewilding. Then they worked out a kind of level of biodiversity that had been encouraged through that. Then they bought an area of the rainforest, the same acreage that they'd actually created in they
Yeah.
raised money so it's a program where you teachers are fantastic. If you inspire them, if you give them space, if you give them the nod and say, this is important to us, we're going to be behind you, they will fly with it.
Mm.
And that's this program that we're doing. I mean, maybe a big point I need to make is that our city, our world, our schools relies on the heads and the leadership team driving this vision with passion,
Yeah.
with emotion, with dedication, and also giving time because as part of the program we do ask them that they train up the teachers and all the staff actually in climate basics, climate literacy, around curriculum development, around assessment, around supporting eco anxiety, that we have the school business managers, caretakers, we can work around climate action plans. So it's a commitment.
Yeah. Yeah.
But why do anything like this half-hearted when it's going to touch every aspect of your life?
Mm.
And we know full well 97% of parents, it seems to be a common figure amongst, we'd carry out surveys about the parents before the schools start the program. 97% of parents come back and say this is really important and we should be doing it in schools.
Mm. Yeah.
95% of the kids and so on and so on. It's got the support.
Mm.
We just need to make sure that we're creating the possibilities within schools.
Yeah. I kind of want to ask a slightly cheeky question in the
Go
sense
on
of
then.
Well, why do you think the government are not picking this up? Why are they not approaching it in this really cohesive way? What's,
Yeah.
is there barriers in the system, or what is it that's kind of, yeah, stopping this?
Yeah, I suppose they don't want to lose the. They've convinced themselves that the green issues are now a lot more toxic than they ever were before. Yeah, I think they were burnt by ULEZ, sadly, and when I think they lost some sort of election in Redbridge or something, didn't they? And
Yeah.
suddenly, what was the Green Deal sort of disappeared a bit, and now they're very concerned about moving too far in that direction. And it's sad because I think all the surveys seem to show that actually the majority of people support this. They
Mm,
do. But it's one of those situations where everybody thinks, oh, it's perhaps only me, and nobody else thinks net zero is that important, and nobody else
mm.
thinks saving the planet is that important. We're in that sort of strange situation. And I think the government at the moment is too concerned that it might be a vote loser. And so that's not going to make me very popular. I'm sure I'll never work with the government, but
Yeah.
that's not the problem. I'll
I
just carry
guess,
on trying to do the right thing in my world. But
yeah.
that's if to be honest with you, Paul, I don't know. What do you think, Paul?
Well, no, I think, what, how long have we got until the next election? Is that another 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
You'd have
well, I
thought.
know that there's potentially two ways this goes, isn't there? We either go that there's a reform government, and then I think all of what we're doing in schools is going to completely disappear.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this earlier, actually. There's local authorities that have had a large number of reform councillors kind of take post, and we've already started to see that.
Mm,
One of the examples is there's a local authority that's had its climate education, the school sustainability piece completely removed, and
mm.
then they've started going through the rest of the website and removing mentions of the climate and nature crisis.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
But that's why schools need to be strong enough in themselves. I mean, you don't need to do much reflection to see that this is really important. You
mm,
don't. And you've got to have, there's no point being the leader of a school unless you feel that you morally are doing the right thing. So, regardless of what the government is telling you, regardless of what new party comes in, there are universal values and principles that you should be following as a head. And they never should falter or change just
mm.
because of the government changing. You know that you should be doing working with young people to care for each other, care for the planet, care for themselves, and so
Yeah, I think you've got an interesting perspective on this, where you've been a head teacher, because I think
on.
the role of head teachers have changed, hasn't it, over the last, it's probably even a decade now,
Mm.
partly to do with the challenges around funding. I know more recently there's, what was it, freedom of information requests and complaints against staff, and there's so many other things now that head teachers have to also juggle. But I really understand what you're saying in that sense of head teachers are in a position where they need to be headstrong and
Mm.
to hold their values really strongly.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it's a good thing. Head teachers hold a lot of power.
Mm,
They do. They can shape their schools by the vision that they actually promote. I mean, it hopefully is a joint vision. Hopefully, it's a community vision. It's involving families and things like that.
mm,
But you can really make a massive difference in schools as a head teacher. And so it's important that, you do continue to reflect about what's important for everybody that you're caring for in your community. So, you might have all these other pressures, but actually life is simple when you actually have a look at some of the things that actually are important. Because
mm.
some of these other pressures, yes, they need dealing with, they need managing, but you don't lose sight of the fundamentals. Yeah.
I think maybe one of the ways to return this also then back to our city, our world, is that sense of that it really prioritized the local so that it's
Mm.
receptive and responsive to what's going on in the local area. And also seems to be, I don't know if democratic's the best way, but the engagement with teachers, with young people, that they're involved in that process of creation, it's co-created rather than sort of dictated from the top down.
Yeah, no, very much. When we're doing for instance, a thematic approach, you plan for the following term, the term before, and you very much involve the young people in deciding what is it that we need to change in terms of, say, energy, on our use of energy, and what could we be doing, coming up with ideas for that, and hopefully they're informing the curriculum. You're using the assembly programs to get constant feedback and pupil voice. You're carrying out surveys, they're carrying out surveys. They're very much involved in, then they know that they're the chief influence of their families. It's their role to go back into their families and spread the word
Mm.
like
Yeah.
preachers. They go out, but they love that. They love that the fact is that they hold that responsibility. So yeah, it is very much about putting them center and of what's happening and the center of what's happening.
And I guess that maybe also one of the key strands then is that sense that it's sustainability in its broadest sense. So, there are some schools, there are some organizations that are very focused on climate education and they see it from a very scientific perspective. But this actually is saying, look, no, the sustainability in its broadest, which also then involves things like equality and justice and
Yeah.
much broader issues that maybe people wouldn't necessarily associate.
Absolutely. And I think we because we work very closely with yourself and with ThoughtBox as well, particularly. And I love ThoughtBox's sort of structure for the way that they look at this, which is very much around it's a crisis of connection. So it's a climate crisis, but that's one of the crises in a climate crisis of connection. So we're disconnected from ourselves as a result of all the stresses and strains that we're facing and what have you. We're disconnected from others as a result of all the social media and factionalization and people going off into silos and so on.
Mm.
And we're disconnected from the planet. And that's leading to, so disconnect from ourselves is leading to all sorts of mental health crises. Disconnecting from others is leading to social injustice, etc. And disconnected from the planet is meaning that we're actually ended up with a climate crisis. We need schools to be that place of connection again. And you need to be able to sort of measure the success of your school by the depth and richness of that connection.
Mm.
And this work is very much about that, looking after ourselves, looking after others, looking after the planet, connecting again. So I think that's a lovely way of looking at the work that we're doing. And I think it's a good way of measuring the effectiveness of schools.
Okay, thinking of bringing this to a close, if there was a teacher who was watching this and inspired and wanted to find out more, I guess there's the website is a good place to go to find out more.
Yeah.
Um, what else? Partly also, have you got any tips or suggestions for people on their sustainability journey? Is there something that could help get them moving along and doing more of this?
Uh, we always talk about really taking the time out in schools because schools are very busy, etc., to revision what you want for your school and for your young pupils and for your community in the next 10 years. What will it look like? Yeah, to take time out. And that's with everybody, pupils talking about it, staff talking about it, families, parents talking about it, taking that moment out to begin to reframe your work and your relationships. So I think for any school that wants to embark on this, don't just it's hard if you do a bit of this. Sometimes they say, oh, start by doing a bit of this, start by doing a bit of that. I'm sorry, I'm a guy that starts up here
Mm,
with the hearts and minds
yeah.
stuff. And then everything else flows from beneath that. Because if that's where you're aiming for and you've remembered what it is, and sometimes that's hard if you're not going back to, and then you keep coming back to that vision on an annual basis. How far have we got in terms of what we are hoping to achieve? What have we achieved so far? What's working well? What isn't? Where do we go next? And so on. But you've still got to have that destination in mind, and that will keep evolving. But schools don't vision enough, I don't think, anymore because of the pressures that they've got. And we end up like this, and we
Mm,
end up just accepting the status quo. We
yeah.
don't challenge things enough. And that's in the end how our young people will come out of the system as well. They need to be able to see other opportunities, other possibilities of living. And we don't take time to look at that often enough.
I think that's a really important piece of advice there. I think the Ministry of Education has fallen into that trap where when we're talking to teachers and they're so rushed and busy and you go, okay, well, there's this one quick thing you can do. And actually
Yeah.
we need to say, no, look, stop. If you're going to do this properly, this needs to be done in a deep sense and
Yeah.
with real reflection.
Mm.
Mm,
Yeah. And that will bring people with you. People move, change, develop because they care and they feel personally connected. They feel valued within it because they've been given a voice and so on. So that's that important of visioning that everybody has a voice in this. Everybody gets to shape the journey they're on, and then everybody becomes engaged in it and understands why they're behaving this way. But you can't, yeah. Otherwise, it is just one poor teacher working in a desert of
yeah.
lack of aspiration and so on. Mm.
Is there anything on the horizon that you're kind of excited about that is a I don't know, even if it's something just a school you're going to go and visit, or is there anything that you've got coming up?
Schools are always excited to visit. I mean, there's lots of great things going on now, which is absolutely lovely. And I know that we talked briefly before we started this interview. I am actually pleased with the curricular assessment review final report. I think it gives a clear lead that this is the way, given that we're talking about politically, it wasn't easy for them
Mm.
because this is not particularly being well received generally amongst all the political parties. They went as far as they possibly could, this committee, I think, to sort of say this should be a fundamental part, yes, of key subject areas, but it also should go much wider. It should involve very much pupils, change makers, support them in feeling empowered, support them in understanding and getting the skills and knowledge they need for the future. And also, schools should be looking across the curriculum to integrate this learning, yeah, in your art, your music, your drama. And they pointed there's already great stuff going on in each of those areas, but all schools should be looking to move in that direction. So I think, it's really positive. It's also, I mean, looking, because I'm that sort of sad individual, I do read Ofsted reports occasionally still. And there is a lot more mention in Ofsted reports around this work, even though, because we're obviously interested in schools that are on the Our City, Our World, or Our Schools World journey. And, they're really picking out the quality of the work that is taking place in terms of it being an ambitious curriculum, in terms of it supporting children developing creativity, critical skills and teamwork and around pastoral development and so on. So they're really, I think, before it even came out in the review, this is being viewed very positively as what should be happening in schools. So
Mm.
there are some sort of green lights there, even though they're kind of faded green at the moment. They will become stronger, hopefully, if people have the courage to move more in that direction in our school system.
I think that's maybe also a reflection of the opportunities in wider society as well, that actually we need to see responding to the climate nature crisis as a real opportunity for positive action to move society into a place where everyone benefits. And I think that then is
Mm.
also mirrored in schools, where this is an opportunity to reflect on, as you've sort of talked about, the real purpose of education and our motivations, and have a real collaborative, collective effort towards achieving something.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of talk in schools about difficulty of recruitment,
Mm.
retention. And I mean, it's only anecdotal, but we do a lot of reviews of the work that we're doing, and we go into schools and we talk to the leaders there. And this is for many teachers, support staff, where at the time when they really do feel they're doing what they came into education for, that suddenly they really feel this has purpose. This really does resonate with why they are here to support and care for young people and their families. And it creates a culture of positivity
Mm.
and inspiration and creativity, and this is what schools could be if they're not being battered from the outside by other things.
Mm.
So yeah, I think it supports a lot of it supports schools now who are in very difficult situations by reminding them of what we should be doing.
Mm.
Mm.
But thank you so much, Jonathan.
You're welcome. Thank you, Paul. It's been lovely talking to you, as always.